What's interesting then, of course, we have the temple in the tabernacle and the temple in Israel, and we have this space where God is saying, well, what does it mean to be my people and for God to be your God? Well, it means that he can dwell in your midst again, right? This is the one people, the people of Israel is the one people that God would actually be with, right? Because what Adam and Eve had done in the garden was temple desecration, right? They had ruined this place where God and humanity could dwell together through their rebellion, and so they get booted out. Exile is getting booted out of the temple, right? Out of God's space. And so the tabernacle and the temple, later temple, are this great thing because it's God saying, I can dwell among you, but it's also a really tragic thing because it's not God dwelling freely in the midst of his whole people. It's God dwelling in a confined temple within his people's space, right? Yeah. Israelites weren't just freely walking with God like Adam and Eve had because of their sin, because they actually are people who are banned from God's direct presence. Only certain priests could go into his presence, and only the high priest into the holiest place once a year, and only after performing all these rituals of atonement, these sacrifices and such. And so it's a beautiful thing, but it's also this constant recognition that we're never quite in that space, right? If you have a temple, it means God's in your midst, but it also means you're not, sin hasn't been fully dealt with.
It's like a barrier.
It is like, yeah. I mean, it is. It's great because a temple means God's there with you, and Jerusalem becomes this place where, this is God's city, and it's God's city because God's king is there, the Davidic king, and because the temple's there, and God's glory cloud is over it and such. And so if you want to get close to God, there is a physical location that is closer to God in a sense than anywhere else in the world, right?
Oh yeah, okay. That is kind of a wild thought.
It is, yeah.
I hadn't really thought of it like that.
Yeah,
before.
And so that's why David and the other psalmists will speak of how they long to be in the temple, because there's this sense in which that, of course, God is omnipresent and stuff, but God's sort of presence, his dwelling with his people, is in this place, and that's, if you want to be close to God and find forgiveness. That's why Solomon's prayer of dedication says, when you sin, you pray toward this house, and God will hear your prayer. And when Gentiles hear the great name of Yahweh, they'll come toward to this house, and God will forgive them and such. But then, of course, the temple is destroyed because of the people's rebellion. So it's a recapitulation of the Adam and Eve story, really, right? Israel as a whole rebels against God, just as Adam and Eve had done, and God's presence is removed. We have this vision in Ezekiel where that weird book where the God's presence. First, Ezekiel's shown this vision of all these weird abominations that are this really creepy vision of all this crazy stuff that's happening in the temple, right? People are sacrificing to all sorts of other gods and stuff. And then we have this vision where the chariot sort of lifts off and God's leaving. And so the temple is destroyed because, and the people are sent into exile. They're removed from God's temple space. What's really strange in the history of Israel is that the vision of God dwelling among his people in blessing doesn't just disappear when Israel goes into exile. Instead, it actually gets ratcheted up big time. And the prophets, Ezekiel, especially Ezekiel, but the others as well, speak of this day when they all speak of this day when God would return to his people. Isaiah speaks of this coming new Exodus, when God would return to reign and to dwell with and to bless and forgive his people.